Now, I like this topic because we've all been there, done this, experienced this, wasted our time and money, and I think the best way to learn is by honestly looking at other people's mistakes. There's a lot of people with advice out there, but a lot of them don't have the experience, and so they'll recommend certain food plot planting practices when really they don't apply to you. They might have worked for them in that situation, and because of the complexities of the situations, even properties right next to each other can be extremely different. I was in a couple Michigan parcels, they were neighbors, and even one of them commented, boy, these plans are completely different, the way they look. And not only the way they look, but the type of food plots that they should plant, the type of bedding areas they should create, how they should create them. Water holes more on one, fewer water holes on the other per acre because of wetlands. Rolling hills on the one, not so much on the other. Already cut timber, but certainly with food plots, even from one neighbor to the next, they can be completely different strategies. So if you try a blanket approach, just to say this is what you should do on all parcels, then you're going to fail about 2/3 of the time, maybe 3/4 of the time, because there's so many different food plot practices that work for one area, don't work for the other. And let's just dig right into this. One of the big things that I see with food plots is not applying the correct amount of lime. When you don't correct pH and you add fertilizer, you can never overcome low pH levels with more fertilizer. In fact, if you don't correct the pH level, then the plants can't take that fertilizer up and actually use them into the plant and allow those plants to grow, and it'll be a complete failure. In fact, the fertilizer gets completely unused. So you have to correct the pH first. And I had a failure like this too. And I might talk about a failure just about with each one of these. So we'll talk about that. But I've had a failure where northern Michigan properties where it was high 4s to low 5s for pH. Now in this particular plot, it was created. I couldn't wait to plant it. And what I found on the light sandy soils up there, as long as I applied lime in August, September when that food plot was created and finished, I could get lime to grow. You know, lime is a soil to soil particle reaction. So the smaller the particle size of soil, like sandy soil versus clay, the quicker the reaction. And even clay, as long as you disc and work that lime into the soil, you can create a quick exchange of lime into the soil so that the pH can change enough to plant rye. On this particular plot, it's the only one I've done this over the years, I didn't add lime. The rye grew to 2 or 3 inches, turned red, brown, and completely died. Rye is the most pH tolerant seed that there is, but it still has its limits too. And I'm sure I wasted fertilizer on that plot too. So again, it can't use the fertilizer. You can never overcome poor pH levels with adding more fertilizer. In fact, the fertilizer just won't get used at all if the pH is low enough. If you don't have enough money, always put your money into lime, trying to correct the pH to the best of your ability, and then don't add fertilizer if you have to make a choice between the two, but you never choose fertilizer over lime when it comes to poor pH levels, and that'll be a huge failure for you, especially when a lot of folks, and I could have added this as a number 6 point, I'll put it on there, is number 6, just planting glamour crops. With all those special plots that people talk about on TV, sound good, there's a big deer on the bag, XYZ hunting celebrities pushing it. It doesn't mean it's a fit, and it'll be a failure, and especially with most of those, because of the mix that they're putting in there and a lot of kitchen sink varieties, you can't just put fertilizer on them. They're usually not pH tolerant, and you're gonna have a complete failure. Number 2, bad mixes. I encourage you to read the labels. A lot of seed companies probably don't like me talking to you about how to read those labels. You're looking at germination rates on switchgrass. Look at inert matter, I-N-E-R-T, matter. Now, if you're planting clover, certain clovers need seed coatings. And in the case of John Comp, I know one of his clover mixes has about 10% inert matter, and that's because there's 10% seed coating for one of the clovers that's in there. We have a seed label that we can show you. It's, I believe, 60%, a little over 60% inert matter. Roughly 6% of that is seed coating for a clover that's in there. That means with that inert matter, 54% of that seed bag is dust, garbage, debris, unclean seed from from a combine, whatever it might be. And you'll often see that these seed bags are not see-through because they don't want you to see that half the bag is filler. So really watch your inert matter amounts on your seed labels. Also look at things like, this is a common mistake with seed mixes where companies are mixing brassica, say rape, turnip, radish, with cereal grains like wheat, oats, and rye. The two need to be planted about 5-6 weeks apart in different areas. They compete with each other. They drastically compete with nitrogen. And right off the bat, if you see a mix with cereal grains and brassica in it, run for the hills, because those two are going to compete with each other. You're better off having those separate plantings. You know, a lot of people just want to have this great mix. They call it the latest, greatest proprietary blend. But when you're combining plants like that, very poor. I could add ryegrass to the mix. Ryegrass is an incredible filler by poor, cheap seed companies. If you see ryegrass in the bag, again, run for the hills, don't buy. Those are usually the seed bags that you find in the big box stores where they're selling in high volume, very cheap blends, not a lot of margin, and you're getting taken to the bank because there's not quality seed within the bag. And I could go on and on. For example, peas. There's a standalone pea planting is 300 pounds per acre. When you have 5 pounds of peas per acre, that equals out to in a bag. Then you're talking one plant every 30, 40 feet. They're just putting that on there because they want you to see Austrian winter peas, buzzword. I've heard that's a good thing. And you plant it, and really there's nothing appreciable in there. You'll even notice it got you to buy that because it was on the bag. Same can be said for sugar beets. Sugar beets need to be planted, even a brassica blend, they need to be planted well before radish, turnips, and rape. A lot of times there's such a small amount in there that even if it did grow partially, you're not going to see the benefits at all. But again, sugar beets, buzzword. It's really hard to plant sugar beets. I've seen very few people successful at it. Except for fencing, irrigation, you can get great tonnage then, 4, 5, 6 tons per quarter acre. High volume if you manicure it and take care of it, but it needs to be protected because it's highly browsed and it a lot of times won't grow, but certainly in a mix, it's not appropriate to mix. You want standalone plantings, and a lot of times that timing is poor when you mix it, just like the rye, oats, and wheats compared to most brassica blends, including rape, turnip, radish, canola, whatever it might be. Those are all in that brassica family. Number 3, weed invasion. Really pay attention. This is one that I've seen 10-acre food plot programs where they have 50% weeds in the plots. Well, that doesn't equal 50% of the forage you're trying to plant. The weeds shade out, take up space, and they reduce the growth on your targeted forage varieties for deer, so that in the end, you get 10% of the plant. You get 1 acre out of 10, not 5 acres out of 10. And so it's critical. In that case, that person would have been better off spending the time and resources to plant 1 acre and do it right, instead of all that money, time, and resources spent to plant 10 acres. And you have to control weeds at all costs. That's why I encourage folks, if you're looking at private land, for some reason you can't plant food plots, especially in a lease or renting that property by permission, and you're not allowed to use chemicals, or at least tilling it 3-4 times to set back weeds, you don't have that big equipment, then why bother planting food plots at all, maybe even to rent or lease that property or hunt it. If you really truly want to have food plots, you're really hitting your head against the wall if you're trying to do so by not controlling weeds. Soybeans, by far the #1 food plot failure in the country. Beans are highly susceptible to overbrowsing by deer. And so most bean plantings fail by August or September, before the season even begins. And there's even people out there that'll say, well, at least 20% of all food plots should be in beans, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I would say that less than 5% of all properties should plant soybeans. There's a case for soybeans to be planted, and we talk about those, especially for summer patterning of new plots, working on weed concerns where you can spray Roundup Ready soybeans throughout the summertime. Maybe you're trying to grow a herd, you want that summer food plot, and those are all reasons to plant beans and get those in the ground. But the #1 crop failure I see every year are beans. And I could actually say brassica isn't too far behind. When you get into northern areas, You could have 3 or 4 acres of brassica, but if you're in a wooded area, even if you have moderate deer numbers to low deer numbers, because they represent the only green forage in the area, they're going to be hit very hard and they don't stand up to grazing at all. And that's why I like a lot of times in those cases layering of rye, maybe rye, peas, and oats. But you're really attacking those cereal grains and trying to get the most volume that you can, even if that volume's lower quality. You can't look at food plots as this is the highest nutritional value for plots, so I'm going to plant this. You have to look at what gives you the most volume and is there for the longest period of time with the most diversity. That's where you start. That's the lowest hole in the bucket, not what's the latest and greatest glamour crop or something that gives the most ultimately protein potentially or nutrient value. Because again, if they're not growing, if they're browsed down before the hunting season started, it was a complete failure. Summer plots, that's right up there with beans, but this could apply to any summer food plot. Summer plots especially fail when you're creating a dough factory. Dough factory is very real, folks. And the reason I say that is if you're creating great fall and winter habitat, high stem count, that's what does need all year long. They need it for summer fawning grounds, they need it for springtime, fall, and winter. And so that's what does would utilize all year long. Bucks, on their other hand, need high overstory and shade and summer food sources during the summertime. That is typically where they are not during the fall. In fact, we find they're typically 1 mile to 2 miles away from their fall grounds during the summer. So they need completely different types of habitat. Does and fawns just need that high stem count. They need good food. So if you're trying to plant good summer food, you have good fall, winter habitat, and then you're trying to plant fall food, you're going to create an army of does and fawns that are waiting for your fall food to crop up. They're going to destroy your fall food plots. You get a lot lower efficiency on your fall food plots, and therefore you don't have the volume needed and diversity in the fall to actually promote and create a deer herd. It's okay to have a lot of does coming into your property the end of September through the end of October, but you do not want them there June, July, and August. Typically, you find the most does during the summer months. You find the least number of bucks during the fall, and there's a reason for that. It's called a dough factory. A lot of times folks are planting their summer food at the expense of fall, whether it's being overbrowsed because you have an army of deer there, or it's just simply taking up space. They're allocating half their acres to clover, for example. The clover might not be drawing any deer in November in the north portion of the country. Maybe it's okay in Kentucky, Missouri, West Virginia, but it's creating that dough factory problem during the summertime. But bottom line is you're creating and planting the summer food at your fall expense. And let's face it, but you ain't helping them. What I mean by that is deer have way more food than they need during the summertime. A lot of times, even if you had great summer plots, you're combining a lot of deer into a small area. Let them space out, reduce overall level of stress, create a more natural environment, and then create some high volume fall food plots that actually give you the ability to attract, hold, build a great herd, and for that you'll have a great hunt. And then of course number 6, really be very wary if it's on a TV personality, on a TV show, promoting XYZ seed bag that's well known throughout the hunting industry. You'll find if you read most of those labels, if you don't address your weeds in the first place, if you're planting a high percentage of summer plots, which a lot of those are, soybeans as well, then you're going to be setting up the potential for failure before you ever put a seed into the ground. Food plot failures come in many ways. I find that if you're really focusing on those fall, cool season annuals, you're planting crops at a time where you can work on and control weeds all summer long. You have time to correct your soils. You have appreciable rain and increasing amounts of rain throughout the fall and into the spring. So you're really planting a lot of drought-proof plots. And if there's ever a failure of your food plots, you can always throw 200 to 300 pounds of rye per acre on those plots, salvage a plot. You can always save a food plot. That's the beauty of all this. If you have a food plot failure, you can use winter rye, winter wheat on better soils to salvage that plot and enjoy the hunting season. And try to avoid these top food plot mistakes because we've all been there. I've planted summer plots at the expense of my fall. I've planted beans that have failed. Weed invasion, who hasn't controlled their weeds on their property, whether it's through proper mowing techniques, lots of tillage, turning that soil, setting back the weeds, or using chemical applications. I've fallen for the bad seed labels back in the day and bad mixes. I've probably even mixed some of those bad mixes myself. I think I've added rye and wheat and brassicas together and watched those little stunted brassicas that were a complete waste of my money trying to grow and being out dominated and competed by that rye. And of course, I told you the story about the pH and the lime. Make sure you're addressing these failures and really trying to find some of those other ones. We go over this list about once a year and we try to come up with some new topics and new ingredients to this list because there's so many potential failures that I'd like to see you avoid and not make the same mistakes that I've made and others have made going into this planting season. Hey guys, I really appreciate you watching today's video. We're out here having some fun today. We're planting some switchgrass, cutting some timber, making some bedding areas, but most importantly, we're putting it all together, and that's critical. Any habitat improvements you're making, you can't just make improvements because it's a good spot. You have to link those together so that helps your hunt this fall. Really, I encourage you to check out my web classes. The link is in the description. It's helped a lot of folks design their properties and do what we're out here having fun doing right now.